Welcome to Where Secrets Go to Die, the disappearance of Derrick Henagan. From the Detroit Free Press, I'm John Wisely. Last time on Where Secrets Go to Die, Trooper David Mogenberg's two families said they believe that he could have been involved in the disappearance of Derrick Henagan, and they don't trust his former employer, the Michigan State Police, to solve this case. But there's a huge question related to that. Why? Why would David Mogenberg be involved in something like that? Why would he be involved in a crime or the cover-up of one? We're not the only ones asking that question. One outside investigator who's followed the Henagan case for years said many of the roads lead to Dave Mogenberg. So, who is this outside investigator? Well, before we meet her, here's some quick background. Derrick had been charged with driving on a suspended license that summer. He'd been released on bond. Before he disappeared, he failed to show up in court. His bond got revoked, and the cops were looking for him. And so was a bail bondsman, Larry Porterfield. His employer, Quick Bail Bonds, risked losing about $1,000 because Derrick didn't show up. So Larry went to look for Derrick at the home he'd shared with Diana. She let him walk through it. Larry remembers seeing a green duffel bag in the garage with some white sneakers nearby. When he didn't find Derrick that day, Larry called a coworker, Jody Newman, for help. She specialized in finding people who skip bond. When I spoke to Larry, he couldn't remember the precise date, but Jody pegs the call as Tuesday, August 5th. She said she's confident that was the day, because after Larry called her, she started calling people listed on Derrick's bond form, including Derrick's mom, Betty Henagan. Betty told Jody that Diana had called the night before to say that Derrick was gone. Betty also said she feared the worst. So if that timing is right, it would have been the day after Derrick was last seen. Watch your steps, slippery here. Hello, Jody.
Hey, how are you?
We're good. Jody worked for years finding people who didn't show up in court. When she was put on the case, she never really left it, even though she retired a couple of years ago from her paid job helping find people like Derrick. Would it be fair to call you a bounty hunter?
A bounty hunter? Absolutely.
That's Jody from an interview with us a while back before she retired.
I was contacted on August 5th by Larry Porterfield after he returned from the home. That's the day that Larry said, Jody, something is not right here. And I said, why, Larry? He said, because she says he's missing, and yet his shoes, the shoes that she described, were sitting in the garage next to his bag of belongings covered in mud. He said, something's not right here.
Larry didn't quite remember all those details when we spoke, but the conversation was a big red flag for Jody. Her work was known as skip tracing. If you skipped out on bond, she'd track you down. She's a whiz at internet searches. She knows how to map people's relationships with their family, friends, and others. That's a big part of how she'd find people. People on the lam have to go somewhere, and they usually end up with people they know. Now, as you heard, Jody does have sort of a raspy voice from years of chain smoking, even though she quit the smokes years ago. But don't let that fool you. Jody doesn't look like the bounty hunters you see in the movies. She stands just over 5 feet tall. She's 59. Her hair is turning gray. She's a grandmother, and it shows in the way she tries to steer young people toward good choices. Most of the people she'd track were younger folks. A lot of them got arrested in part because they didn't have someone like Jody in their life to set them straight. When she tracked down someone who skipped out on bond, she didn't chase them down alleys with a gun drawn. She turned on the grandma charm and talked him into doing the right thing.
We're non-lethal. We do not carry guns. I don't believe in them. That opens the door for accidents on the job. I've learned since been doing it for 23 years, I've learned that if you show them respect and you respect them, they're going to respect you. You're not going to have a big brawl. You're not going to have all that. They understand they were caught, and now it's time to either man up or woman up. Come get in my car, and let's go to the jail and deal with it.
Jody has been tracking Derrick's disappearance since the beginning. Like me, she never met Derrick, yet it's impossible to overstate her impact on his case. She has conducted her own investigation, collecting hundreds of pages of documents related to the case. She stores them in binders in a home office. She has several computer hard drives with even more information. She has interviewed many of the people who were near Derrick before he disappeared.
I have probably spoke to, I want to say close to maybe 200, 250 people.
And she's often recorded those conversations and shared them with police and with us. If you were wondering, Michigan law has been interpreted to allow one person on a phone call to record it, even if the other party doesn't know. For Jody, the Henagan case has become personal. She spent years tracking down bond fugitives.
Derrick is the only one I can't bring home. And until I can bring him home, I'm not going to stop.
Jody also became close with Betty Henagan. They were both mothers. They both had suspicions about this case. In episode 2, you heard Betty talking about that.
I don't know where my son is. I know somebody up there murdered him, and they're going to get caught and they're going to jail. Because I'm not going to shut up, and I'm not going away. And I've got people backing me, and they're helping me 100%.
That's from an interview that Jody taped with Betty. Jody posted it on YouTube to help draw attention to Derrick's case. The two became even closer when Betty became ill. Betty Henagan? Well, she never did find her son. She didn't live long enough. Her former neighbor, Melissa Woodall, remembers seeing Betty's final years.
To say tormented her till she died is a light word. Is not even close to what it did to her. I mean, I know that it took years off of her life. I know that. Everyone knows that. Like she wasn't the same. You just can't be.
Betty died in 2017. She was 64 years old. She'd spent the last 8+ years of her life searching for answers that she wouldn't find on this side of the grave.
It wasn't fair that Betty passed away with no answers. It wasn't fair that Betty passed away with no justice. And I will not give up. I promised Betty the day before she passed away, because I went and seen her. We sat there, we cried together. We talked really candidly about Derrick's case. And she told me, she said, you know, if you give up and quit, I understand. And I said, there's no quitting in my vocabulary.
Jody said she met Betty in person for the first time on Mother's Day weekend, 2009. That's about 9 months after Derrick vanished. Betty traveled with some of Derrick's friends to Newberry in the Upper Peninsula to tack up posters around town. The posters included Derrick's picture and some phone numbers for people to call if they had any information about what happened to him. Jody helped tack up posters, too. She traveled with her daughter and a friend who helps Jody with skip tracing. Jody ended up driving Betty to various spots in and around Newberry. Jody said they noticed a cream-colored Chrysler following them, which they were told was Diana's. In Jody's telling of it, which her friend confirms, Diana had shown up and threatened Jody's daughter and her friend, wanted them to leave, told them they have targets on their backs. Jody said she then confronted Diana. She told her that if Diana continued to threaten and harass her or the people she was with, that she was going to call the police and file a report.
And she laughed at me. She literally laughed in my face. And she said, well, I'm not worried about it because I got Mo in my back pocket. I said, huh? So I said, who cares who you got in your back pocket? I'm going to call the state police and I'm going to file a complaint against you. She said, I don't care. I don't care. Maybe I'll just call him right now. And picks up her phone and starts dialing a number. And I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, I told you I have Trooper Mogenberg in my back pocket.
Jody didn't know at that time who Trooper David Mogenberg was.
She made it very clear that she had Mo. And it took me a while to find out who Mo was because she just called him Mo. And it took me a while to figure it out, but, I catch on real quick when you start telling me you're going to call him to have my harassment complaint dealt with. Like, you've got that much pull in this town that you could just call a Michigan State Trooper, have him show up here. You've got his personal number, and you can have him show up here and tell me I can't file a harassment complaint. That's what she said.
If Diana did have a direct number to Trooper Mogenberg, that's significant. For most cops, at least most cops I've known, it takes time and a sense of trust before they'd share something like that. Now look, maybe Diana was bluffing. Still, in a police report taken years later, I can see some evidence of this phone number thing coming up, at least when I read between the lines. You see, Mogenberg wrote in his initial report about the stolen guns that Diana had called the Post, that is, the state police post, to report the break-in. But when Diana was questioned years later, she said she didn't call Trooper Mogenberg that day. She said one of her sisters did. Diana's name is blacked out in that report, but I'm confident it's her based on the conversation. And it appears Diana said she didn't know if the sister had Trooper Mogenberg's number or if she called the police in general. For Jody, in that moment, on that Mother's Day weekend, she could read the situation. She was an out-of-towner, like me, from downstate. She was agitating to find information on Derrick's disappearance. Now she felt like she was in the crosshairs of Diana Maddox, who had the home field advantage. We'll be back after the break. And we're back. Jody continued her work, but she also kept a close eye on Diana. Jody said she even got Diana to talk to her on the phone several times, with the recorder running. You've already heard some of that tape. It was a genuine effort to get Diana's help in finding Derrick. And for a time, it was cordial.
Hello?
Hi, is Di there?
This is...
Hey, what's up?
Oh.
What? You don't even.
They would chat about family, about the kinds of food they liked.
I love crabs.
And they're like to die for. They're really good, so.
Like crab legs and stuff, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a seafood person, too.
I'm in.
And about the status of the police investigation. But Jody still harbored suspicions about Diana. Those suspicions go all the way back to when Larry Porterfield had mentioned the muddy sneakers in the garage. Those suspicions only grew after that Mother's Day weekend, and eventually those phone chats became sort of a cat and mouse game. When Diana would say something that could be important to the case, Jody would pass it along to the state police. Once, Diana told Jody that some men in a black SUV approached her and told her not to date her current boyfriend, or, quote, he would end up where Derrick was, end quote. Jody said she passed that story along to police, who went out to question Diana about it.
And she laughs about it. And she said, I was only playing around with her. How are you playing with me? How are you playing with me? That's not playing with me.
As you can imagine, those conversations eventually stopped. Diana's not too fond of Jody anymore, and the feeling is kind of mutual. When I first started emailing Diana asking to interview her, she didn't believe that I was actually a reporter at the Free Press. She thought I was Jody, pretending to be a reporter. That's how suspicious she's become. I should note that Jody wasn't working alone. She assembled a group of people who were interested in the case. She dubbed them Team Derrick. They even had T-shirts printed up for the team. One team member was Janet Morris. She lived in the Upper Peninsula, and she recorded an interview which Jody provided to us. Janet said she taped a conversation with Diana's sister, Christina Ott. Christina had opened up to her after seeing Janet comment on the Henagan case online. Christina also spoke to the cops and eventually with me. Between those conversations and the police reports, we can piece together a pretty good understanding of Christina's account. It is worth noting that these conversations happened years after Derrick disappeared. Christina acknowledged questioning Diana about what happened to Derrick, and she described visiting the house that Derrick and Diana shared. She believes it was the day after Derrick was last seen. Several people were there that morning, including her brother BJ. Christina said she spotted drops of blood on the garage floor, and she confronted Diana about it. Here's Christina discussing it with Janet.
I even remember asking her about the blood. I asked her what that was. And she said it was blood. She said Derrick had cut himself up in the rafters.
And she didn't bother to clean it up?
I don't know. I don't know,
Christina said Diana told her that Derrick had gone into the rafters to hide from police and cut himself. Christina said she hadn't really thought about it until years later when she heard that police were raising questions about Diana's possible involvement in Derrick's disappearance.
Like I said, for the longest time, I believed it was them other people. And then I sit here and I think, maybe I'm overthinking, but in my gut, I just feel like I walked in on the cleanup of the murder that morning.
When I reached Christina by phone, we talked for about an hour. She didn't want me to record our conversation, but she agreed to answer questions and let me write down her answers. I read her that quote from the recorded conversation we received from Jody. She didn't deny saying it. She said she may have thought that, at the time, that she'd walked in on a cleanup operation. But she said she doesn't know what happened to Derrick. She did say that she thinks of Derrick and his fate every day, and she really wants to see the case solved, no matter who is involved. She said she's questioned Diana repeatedly about it, and Diana has always denied any involvement in Derrick's disappearance. We also discussed something else she told investigators back in 2015, that she'd once called police on Diana's behalf. Police reports show she said she called after hearing Derrick was chasing Diana with a knife. Some of the details are a little murky, and Christina wasn't able to pinpoint a date for that call. She told police she believed it was the day Derrick disappeared, but she wasn't sure. Years later, she repeated those doubts to me. She also said the blood she spotted really could have been from Derrick cutting himself in the rafters. She said Diana told her that Derrick had chased her around with a knife more than once. I asked Christina for her theory on the case. She said she didn't know what happened, but in 2015, she offered one to police. The officer wrote in his report, quote, Christina stated she believes there was some sort of argument/accident between Diana and Derrick. She believes the confrontation ultimately led to an accident leading to Derrick's death. She believes BJ then helped Diana dispose of Derrick's body, end quote. I asked Christina to tell BJ that I wanted to talk to him. I also reached out to BJ directly, through Facebook, through a phone connected to his business, through email addresses linked to him, and through a registered letter. When I knocked on the last UP address I had for him, a woman there told me the Fosters had moved out of state. She said she was friends with them and promised to pass along my message. BJ has never responded. Again, BJ told police repeatedly he had nothing to do with Derrick's disappearance. Jody's research includes more than interviews. She's done extensive internet searching, and she's used social media to keep Derrick's case active. She created the Facebook page we mentioned. It has about 3,400 followers. Jody has used that platform to discuss the case. She posts on anniversaries like Derrick's birthday or the day he disappeared. She calls out Michigan State Police for not solving the case. And she's also used it to poke at Diana and members of Diana's family, anyone she thinks might know what really happened. Sometimes the posts spark heated exchanges. Some people accuse her of posting speculation that doesn't help the case. When I asked Christina about Jody, she had nothing good to say about her. Quote, "I think she's a pain in the ass. Somebody needs to investigate it, but she's not an investigator. She's not the cops. She needs to leave it to them to do it. And somebody needs to do it. She's not the one to do it." End quote. Christina said Jody's Facebook page and the discussion on it has made people hate Diana and assume she's guilty. Quote, "She's got her convicted, and they don't have evidence of this. Show me the evidence." End quote. I have to admit, Jody's name comes up a lot in this story. Just about every person I've interviewed about it mentions her. They all follow her work online, and there have been times where I've had to ask myself, is this person telling me what they know from direct experience? Or are they channeling Jody and her page? You've already heard some of them, and you'll meet a few more as we go. Many of them have been in contact with one another to varying degrees, online and off. Now, if they were testifying in a courtroom setting, they'd likely be sequestered. They'd all wait in the hallway and be called into court one by one to testify. That's done to try to prevent one person's testimony from influencing someone else's. Well, for better or for worse, there's none of that here. They've all heard what others are saying, and in a lot of cases, they've read it, shared it, commented on it. When I do a keyword search on the main Henagan report, the word rumor and variants of it appears 26 times. One cop on this case said he refused to answer questions from people he interviewed. He was afraid his answers would be passed along to others, who might repeat them when they were interviewed. He termed it the grapevine effect. I get his concern. We've spent a lot of time tracking all these storylines in all their iterations, from the online chatter, through the police and court records, into the recorded interviews we've heard and conducted ourselves. Some of them track consistently all the way through, but others diverge or dead end in one place or another. It's frustrating. And let's be clear, Jody has an opinion that is more or less shared by many of the people she's been in contact with. She's put in countless hours researching the case, and she's developed a theory of what happened. She's pretty convinced that Diana and the people around her know exactly what happened to Derrick. And she's pretty convinced that Trooper Mogenberg knew too. In Jody's view, Trooper Mogenberg may not have been directly involved, but he may have looked the other way. She shared that fear with the state police. Over the years, she told several investigators on the case what Diana had claimed about her relationship with Mogenberg. Jody said one investigator laughed at the suggestion. Another said, "That's interesting." A third actually took her seriously and asked questions about it. As we mentioned, there have been other theories out there, beyond Jody's, theories which don't involve Diana, or Mogenberg for that matter. Those were looked into as well. One theory was that Derrick returned to the Lower Peninsula and was killed in or near his hometown of Hartford by someone from his past. State police spent a lot of time looking into that, including digging holes for his remains, but nothing came of it. Another theory was that he overdosed at Denny's place, and Denny hid the body in a swamp. Another theory was that Derrick took a bunch of pills and walked into the woods, likely overdosing and dying there. A friend of Denny's even told police he spotted a flock of ravens nearby. Still another theory would claim Derrick was buried on that friend's property. But Jody's theory has been heard the most because of the Facebook page, and it tracks pretty closely with the police reports we've received, which, as you've heard, became the starting point of our own investigation. Now, having opinions like Jody's, sharing them with police, and putting some of them online, that's going to piss off some people. And Megan Maddox, Diana's adopted daughter, who you heard from in episode 3, she said she doubts some things on Jody's page.
Well, then the whole "Where's Derrick Henagan" page came about. Jody at the time went after me and my sister and accused us. She had accused all three of us, actually, cleaning this murder scene up. I mean, it got so bad to the point where I had to call the cops in Escanaba where I lived to, tell them, like, hey, this is what's going on. Like, she's slandering us. She's, harassing us. Like, all this is going on.
Megan denies buying bleach or cleaning up blood stains. She insists that she doesn't know what happened to Derrick, and if she did, she'd tell the police. She also said that she's had an on-again, off-again relationship with Jody, which has turned sour. She said at this point, anything coming from Jody is, quote, toxic. Other people are more confident in Jody's work. Among them is Mike Niger, the body hunter you met in episode 1.
As the case goes older and colder, the family still wants answers. I think it's, in terms of seeking resolution in this case, I think Jody has been, very helpful. She's been very helpful to me. Anytime I'm talking to, an investigator or someone who's looking into this case, officially, I suggest that they talk to her because she's a wealth of knowledge, and they can sift through what she's found and see what's there and decide what they want to follow up on to substantiate from a factual basis. So she's, been very, very good for this case, I think.
Like Jody, Mike got to know Derrick's mom, Betty Henagan, and he agreed to help in the search for Derrick. He was in Newberry that Mother's Day weekend, 2009, when Jody and Betty were tacking up posters around town. Remember, Mike is retired from the state police, including time working in the crime lab. He knows how to handle forensic evidence. That weekend, working on behalf of Betty Henagan, he agreed to search the home where Derrick and Diana had lived. Diana? She had moved out in August when she was still pregnant. In December, she gave birth to a son. This was the following May.
It was my understanding when I got involved in it that that house had never been searched. No one had looked at it from a forensic standpoint. Now, I could be wrong, but that's my understanding when I was talking to the state police. And so, I got permission from the state police to help the family with the case.
He said he asked the state police to send a forensic technician, just in case he found any evidence worth analyzing. But ultimately, they didn't. So he went ahead without them. He brought a human remains detection dog named Tucker, a frisky black lab mix. The resident of the home gave him permission to search.
The HRD canine had indicated on a wall, which appeared to have, as I recall, some damage to it in a bedroom and had been, part of the wall may have been replaced and then maybe replastered and then repainted. So the dog indicated on that area there, as well as an outlet in that wall, specifically on the outlet. And then on the register right below that wall.
That's not the first time we've heard someone discuss that bedroom. You remember Kathleen Woodley, the landlady. She described the patched-up drywall and the bleach-stained carpets and damage to a heat register in episode 3. Now look, Mike will be the first to admit that human remains detection by dogs is not an exact science. We learned that ourselves when we joined him in the search of the woods. But that's not all that Mike found.
After we did the house, there was carpeting that had been removed, I believe, from the house, but was still on site. I think it was in a pole barn. And so we went out there and had the HRD canine search that area. And the dog indicated on one area of carpet. And so, I cut that area out and packaged it up so that, the state police could take it and analyze it to see if there was anything the scientists could find on that.
Before he sealed the carpet up, Mike used a test strip known as a hemostix to check for the presence of blood-like compounds. The test came back positive. Now, Mike will tell you those quickie tests have been wrong many times. The state police lab tested the carpet, and they didn't find anything on it. The lab report said, quote, "Chemical testing did not indicate the possible presence of blood," end quote. So that made me curious, and I reached out to a couple of specialists from crime labs in other states. I'll spare you the technical details, but they said yes, it does happen. Hemostix have been known to yield false positives. The experts I talked to said there are a lot of variables that can impact the item being tested. The passage of time, the presence of heat, moisture, bacteria. Those things can all degrade a sample to the point that it could test negative. Maybe there never was any blood on that carpet, but the way the cops handled that sample is the kind of thing that fuels suspicions. One interesting point on the lab report is the date. It says the state police delivered the carpet sample to the lab in October 2010. That's almost 17 months after Mike Niger bagged and tagged it. The reports show the sample also sat at the house for 3 weeks before a trooper stopped by to collect it. Why? Now look, the state police certainly did investigate the Henagan case. The case file runs hundreds of pages. More than 36 troopers, detectives, and supervisors have worked on it. They conducted interviews, got search warrants and subpoenas, administered polygraph tests. But they never seemed to compile enough evidence to make a case against any one suspect. We'll be back after the break. And we're back. As I read through this file, I often see what looks like a lack of urgency in working it. I asked repeatedly for an interview with Colonel Joseph Gasper, who headed the state police for the bulk of my investigation. I also wanted to talk to him because he had been David Mogenberg's boss on the governor's executive protection unit. Through a spokeswoman, he declined to speak to me. I even went over his head to Governor Gretchen Whitmer's office. Maybe she could convince him to talk to me. No luck. Staffers in her office told me he wouldn't be giving an interview. But Gasper's not the only one who's not talking. One detective sergeant who has worked on the case in recent years appears to have been close to Mogenberg. He wrote a glowing tribute to him that appeared in a magazine published by the Troopers Union. He said Mogenberg had been his field training officer early in his career, and that they laughed together every day. He wouldn't talk to me. He said his public affairs office told him not to. People who follow this case closely find these kinds of connections suspicious. Now, in fairness to the state police, they did eventually give me someone to discuss the case. A spokesperson at Michigan State Police headquarters in Lansing told me to contact Captain Clint Michelin. When we spoke, he was in charge of the state police in the Upper Peninsula, but he was not super familiar with the Henagan case. He couldn't answer specific questions about why something was done at a particular time, because he wasn't involved. He also said he didn't know Trooper Mogenberg very well. He said he remembers Mogenberg being in the Newberry Post, but they didn't work together. But Michelin had investigated Mogenberg at least once on a criminal complaint, though he didn't remember the details of the case. When we spoke, I asked him if he thought the Henagan case could still be solved. He said it could, though he admits the passage of time makes it harder.
These types of cases is so frustrating because there's no body. There's no definitive determination from what I understand that there is somebody deceased and it was due to foul play. Without that body, that's a big obstacle to overcome for investigators and pushing your case forward legally and everything else with prosecutors on board with thinking, okay, we have viable charges based on, such and such evidence.
I asked him in a later conversation if he thought the case was investigated properly, given the Mogenberg connection, the claims made by his daughter.
I don't have reason to question the integrity of the investigation based on the people that I believe were involved in that. They're good investigators with integrity, and they're going to do the right thing regardless of who's involved as a suspect in any particular case or who may be a witness or otherwise. I can speak to that. As far as exactly what was done, I'm not sure.
Captain Michelin said his read of it is that investigators did what they could with what they had.
An investigation will fizzle off if there just isn't something, meat on the bone to bite into to continue an investigation. So even if they believe, okay, there could be something here, but we've exhausted all of our investigative leads, and until something more firsthand or concrete is received, there's nothing left to do.
A lot of the people I talked to about this case would like to see some fresh eyes on it. That includes Mike Niger. Now, remember, he's a retired state trooper himself, and he has great respect for the agency and the people who work there.
There's a lot of other issues with this case that I don't have personal knowledge of, but I've been told through interviews that are, if true, are very troubling, very, very troubling for law enforcement and for the state police and just for me personally. I've had the FBI look at this case and some of the information, and they were concerned and they found some information very credible enough that they were interested. And I'm still pursuing that angle that the FBI come in and look at this case, because they're not going to have any personal entanglement with the community, with any of the people, the citizens there, or anybody at the post, any of the investigators. If there was a case for them to come in on, my gut says this is the case for them.
I asked the FBI if they ever did investigate. Their spokeswoman declined to comment, noting they don't confirm or deny the existence of an investigation. I must say, researching this story, researching this case, you do start to see things that are troubling, to use Mike's word. The more I looked at the way the state police handled this case and the way they handle my inquiries at times, the more questions I had. And here's the most troubling part. People I've interviewed for this story told me they aren't necessarily surprised by the way this case has played out. They say they've seen questionable police conduct in other cases in the Upper Peninsula as well. And Dave Mogenberg? He's knee-deep in all that too. Next time on Where Secrets Go to Die.
When she told him she was going to tell everything that had been going on and how crooked he was, that's when he beat her really bad. Threw her out of her car and left her in a ditch in Seney, 7 miles from here. And she called me to come and get her.
This podcast is a production of the Detroit Free Press. It was investigated, written, and hosted by me, John Wisely. Our executive director is Anjanette Delgado. Our executive producer is Darcy Moran. Kathy Kalashevsky is our story editor, and Jim Schaefer is our managing editor. Nicole Avery Nichols is editor of the Detroit Free Press. Sound design and mix by Garrett Tiedemann. Original theme music by Camilla Cantu and Brian Castillo. Thanks to associate audio producer Robin Chan and development and contributing producer Tad Davis. And a special thanks to former Free Press photojournalist Kathleen Galligan, whose initial reporting was instrumental to this story. Outside audio in this episode was provided by Jody Newman. For more on this story, including photos, videos, and source documents, see our Where Secrets Go to Die show notes. If you have a tip for me, you can send it in an encrypted email to wiselyj@proton.me. To support investigative journalism like this, become a Detroit Free Press subscriber. Also, be sure to rate and review this podcast. That's a huge help to us. See you next time. If you or someone you know has experienced domestic violence, help is available through the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-SAFE or by visiting their website at thehotline.org.